This video is brought to you by Skillshare, but more on that in a moment. Strixhaven previews brought with it yet another mechanic where we got to muck about with our sideboards, or perhaps we should rename them our outside boards, am I right? Learn and lesson allow us to grab things we want or need during a game, turning our sideboards from between game changes into in-game toolboxes. The learn mechanic in particular gives certain spells the ability to have a discarded card then draw a card like Rummage on it, which means that Dredge really do be having a new toy, but also alternatively you may forego this Dredge enabling Rummage to go and grab a lesson from your sideboard. These lessons come in a few shapes and sizes, including a load of colourless instants and sorceries, as well as some coloured ones too. Now don't worry, Gavin Verhey said explicitly, in spite of the colourless spells thing, that there are no Eldrazi in this set.
And because I know you're all thinking it, the answer is no, by the way. Despite any landscape resemblances to Kozilek, there are no Eldrazi in this set.
I still think that's very particular wording, saying that there won't be an Eldrazi in the set, when if you look at this avatar fucking thing, can you really tell me it doesn't look like some time-displaced emergence of the metadimensional shadow of Kozilek himself as he rebirths from the blind eternities? I don't know what to tell you if you can't see it. I'm calling it now. The avatars of Strixhaven are Eldrazi, just by another name. I mean, Gavin did literally say...
And sorry, fan theorists. Once again, no. The card has nothing to do with Eldrazi.
And that sounds like an absolutely definitive statement, but all I can say is... don't believe his lies. I found it interesting that basic lessons, the teachings of fundamentals of topics at the school, are colourless from a flavour perspective, the concept of learning and knowledge itself being perhaps colourless, and later on what you do with those skills and information being what becomes philosophically aligned to a part of the colour pie is pretty damn cool. But ultimately, we were told that the point of these lessons being colourless was to make them playable in multiple decks, giving access to them in draft, and to a lesser extent constructed decks, giving them access to evergreen effects, evergreen being their word, not mine. So that kind of dismantles the flavour of them being skills that don't inherently have a colour until you utilise them. Oh well. Lessons and learning marks yet another inclusion of wish-like cards in a newly released set, a trend that I see to be ever increasing. And with Commander being this omnipresent, all-powerful, collectible main format of Magic now, after the year of Commander and the amount of money Wizards of the Coast made, it starts people asking the question, why can't we play these learned lessons and these wishes in Commander? What's the reason for it? Why can't I, as a person, wish for a Flash Fires and blow up all the planes in play when two of my opponents are playing mono white? If the idea of that doesn't make your toes curl and your labia retract, then you're probably a monster, just like me. I think it is worth having a conversation around this topic, especially as new sets introduce more and more of these cards doing these kinds of things. So in today's video, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. The history of wishes per se, and the ongoing growth of them as a thing in Magic, and then how that relates to Commander. But before we do that, on the topics of lessons and learning, let's talk about Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community, a platform for creatives to take their next steps on their journey, whether that be in illustration, design, photography, or video. They have a huge offering of varied topics available, from fundamentals and advanced tutorials for things like Photoshop and Premiere, to classes on creative processes of making YouTube content from established creators like MKBHD. I've mentioned it before in a video, but I've been using Daniel Scott's advanced training course for Adobe Photoshop to improve my ability to make thumbnails. And recently I used some of those skills to touch up a wedding photo that I have that had always bugged my wife. I know that might seem like a weird tangential thing, but I like that it's not always to do with my work life, although I guess showing you this makes it part of my work life. I guess it all comes full circle. Skillshare is ad-free and curated specifically for learning, so what are you waiting for? There's a link in the description below to start your trial, and after that is less than $10 a month, which is less than the price of a collector's booster that you will probably open a Windsguard Crag in and think, what the hell am I doing with my life? A Windsguard Crag? Are you actually fucking kidding me? The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description below will get a free trial of premium membership, so you too can explore your creativity.
What'll it be, Master?
You're
gonna grant me any 3 wishes I want, right?
Almost. There are a few provisos, a couple of quid pro quos.
The first wish card was the Ring of Maruf in Arabian Nights, a literal allusion to the traditional stories of wishes being granted by genies, often associated with Middle Eastern fairy tales, which was the main theme of Arabian Nights as a set. In that set, we also got Aladdin, who steals artifacts, and Aladdin's Lamp, which allowed you to fix your drawers to an extent with a card selection ability, kind of playing on the idea of getting what you want. And we also got Aladdin's Ring, which also existed in Revised, as a huge 8 mana, 8 to activate, 4 damage to any target colourless mana sink that was so cost inefficient even a channel couldn't help you kill somebody with this in hand. 5 years later, we finally got a return to this outside of the game meta tutoring in Judgment with the actual wish cycle where we get the name from today. These were cards that depicted a djinn granting various themed wishes to grab cards from outside the game for their wisher or wishee. Outside of the game has rather elegantly in competitive Magic come to mean from our sideboards, the 15 card sideboards that we have to change our deck between games. And these wishes see play too in Legacy, with Burning and Cunning Wish both being bit plays in various Legacy decks from Charbelcher through to Storm and Obna Show over the years. And the sideboard is traditionally where the 15 cards sit that you can swap in and out of your deck, in and out of your main deck between games against an opponent in a tournament. It allows you to have access to powerful hoses or to make a terrible matchup significantly better, or even just sideboard into a different game plan or combo plan between games. You normally play your first game with your set 60 and games 2, and if there's a third game, you get to play with your sideboard cards. Being able to sideboard into a card like Stony Silence or Rest in Peace are what have kept decks like Affinity and Dredge as honest as they could be in older formats. Having powerful Game 1 decks struggle to win Game 2 and 3 against effects like Lily of the Void is a good thing. It helps to hate against linear strategies and keep them in check. But the wishes open these sideboards to become toolboxes to be played with. Primarily in Legacy, wishes are used to grab redundant parts of the titular combos or cards to fight through hate, like Chain of Vapor or an alternative win condition like Empty the Warrens. This in itself is a kind of cost. Instead of having access to a ton of powerful effects to hose your opponent or open up your post-board matches in bad matchups, you instead have your sideboard slots taken up by toolbox cards. This is best seen in current Legacy in some Karn decks where, like Mono Red Prison or Mono Blue Aeons, having as little as 3 to 5 actual sideboard cards that might come into Game 2, normally just a playset of Leyline in the Void. There is a cost to having such versatility in a wish package, a lack of between game sideboard options. Of course, this goes away when we start to talk of Best of 1, or Commander where sideboarding doesn't happen, if we had a sideboard. More of that in a moment. Wishes kind of fell out of favour with Wizards though, as we saw very few of them for the longest time, so much so that when they did show up, it was kind of note. Glittering Wish was Time Spiral's callback to the wishes of old, as Time Spiral itself was a huge hodgepodge of self-referential masturbation, and I fucking love it for that very reason. Spawnshire of Ulamog used the wish mechanic, for lack of a better term, to play on the themes of Eldrazi emerging from beyond space and time, allowing you to summon countless numbers of Eldritch Horrors from the Blind Eternities. And we saw a literal callback to this in Eldritch Moon with Coax from the... I've written Ling Eternities here. It's meant to be blind. I've somehow missed out the B and typed a G instead of a D. Okay, anyway, back to what I was saying. Wishes have become quite uncommon. But as Bob Marley once said, the times they are a-changing. There is a growing trend for outside the game effects coming back to Magic. Excluding Companion, Conspiracy, Learn and Lesson, there are, prior to the release of Strixhaven, only 16 cards that have this outside the game reference in black border. 6 of those have been printed since Ixalan, since the dawn of the Best of 1 format and of MTG Arena's rise. That is 37% of Magic's Wishes cards being printed in the last 3 years. Then we see Companion, a mechanic that stuck a Pokemon in your sideboard that you could cast if your deck met the requirement for it, another 10 outside the game cards that utilize sideboards. That's 26 cards, 16 of which were printed in the last 3 years, 61% of these cards printed in the last 3 years. There are 20 lessons in Strixhaven and 10 learners, bringing us up to 56 cards that either sit outside of the game, or access from outside of the game, or access outside the game, making it 82% of the cards that do this being printed since Ixalan. Now, of course, this number is skewed heavily by the fact that the latest set is using outside the game as part of one of its key mechanics. So I wouldn't call it a trend if it weren't for the fact that we had 10 companions in Ikoria, as well as the creation of cards like Fae of Wishes and Khan, and the ongoing growth of cards that access the outside of the game. It's like every other set we get one big one, Mastermind's Acquisition being the first one to sort of usher in this new age. It is very, very clear to me that this is something that Wizards will continue to explore, and this isn't a value judgment from me. I'm not crying about this. I'm not saying it's a concern. I'm personally fine with it if it's not another companion scenario where, after 5 minutes of playing with it, it's abundantly clear that the mechanic is busted as fuck. So I'm not saying this is a problem, I'm just saying it's a trend we can observe, and that will factor into the Wish conversation we're about to have. So where does Commander fit into all this? Well, Wishes aren't playable in Commander. Well, that isn't strictly true. You can put this Wish in your deck, they just can't access anything. Now, Sheldon Meanory kindly broke this down by splitting hairs on Twitter, explaining that to clear up some folks' misunderstanding. Incorrect. Wishes don't work in Commander because of no sideboards. Correct. Wishes don't work in Commander because of Rule 11. There also happen to be no sideboards, but the two aren't connected. When I asked if this was not just, as I said, splitting hairs, Sheldon replied, "Not really. The reason they don't work is because we don't want them to, not because we lack the infrastructure to make it happen." Okay, I like Sheldon a lot. I think we owe him a lot for creating this wonderful format that is Commander, and I've hung out with Sheldon, I like him, but I mean, I just don't know what the distinction here is other than pointing out that it's a very personal thing that you don't like them. I don't get it. It's very clear that, obviously, Sheldon and the RC and the CAG, I assume, feel very strongly about this, but truth be told, so do others as well. Now, to make it abundantly clear, I know some people want to play with their toys in Commander or play with Wishes. I don't care too much, honestly, either way. I support people playing with their toys and all that jazz, and I know where they're coming from. I can relate because I have made it abundantly clear before that I think the hybrid rules should be changed so that players can play with a kitchen finks and a mono white deck, for example. And before you say just rule zero it, cool, okay, I guess. I can't rule zero on MTGO when I play EDH and chill, or when I guest on Commander Clash or something. I can't realistically rule zero my decks if I want to play in a public space like Spell Table or at Magic Fest either, because I don't want to come in and be like, can I do X? And the table are like, of course, yeah, sure. When in reality they don't want to. I don't think people will refute those sort of things as openly as you'd think they would. I think rule zero is not constructive towards a discussion around how things could change for the better. I think it is there to prop up the status quo, and it's often used as a defense by the people who are getting what they want. I generally dislike the whole just rule zero it sort of hand-wavery thing that happens, because whilst this is not an official format for tournaments, so the rules can change from playgroup to playgroup, it is weird to have a community-led, community-grown format where the community are told not to question what is happening right now or to discuss what is happening right now, and rather splinter off and do what they want at home. It's just a weird way of dealing with legitimate concern or questions around why can't we play Wishes, for example. But with all that said, Wishes do bring a lot of problems with them, and this is why a conversation is valid. Sure, you can't go and get any card in your deck like you can with Demonic Tutor, but what they do allow you to do is grab hateful, narrow hoses that would be silly to play in your main deck. Boil blows up all islands, and it's probably a bad card to play in a metagame when no one is playing islands. Now, that's not a common thing, but it could be a thing that happens in your local playgroup as people play mono green and mono red and similar. So when you draw Boil against your opponents all playing their monocolored decks that aren't blue, it doesn't do anything. However, if they are playing islands, or a Dryad of Elysian Grove to turn their lands into islands, this becomes not so powerful, oppressive, and busted. So, instead of playing this as a potential brick in your main deck, you play it in your sideboard, in one of the slots that you've got in your sideboard, and you just wish for it when you need it, set it off, and you've had no cost. There's been no opportunity cost of playing this in your sideboard, because you were never going to draw it as a dead card in your main deck. The same goes for Rest in Peace and Stony Silence and Micas Inflatus and other bits that might do nothing besides upset certain people you might play against. Beyond that, Wishes move the format away from 100 card singleton nature into this world where we have 103, 107, or if we use a full sideboard, 115 cards accessible to some people and not others who aren't playing the Wishes. A solution that is often put forward by multiple people is that we reduce the side of this outside board. And that seems to be the solution that Wizards have gone to for Best of One. Because at the moment, or up until yesterday, time of recording, Best of 1 had a 15 card sideboard even though you never sideboarded on Arena. So when you play Fey of Wishes or Karn, you had access to 15 different slots to grab stuff from. Wizards of the Coast have decided to reduce that down to just 7. Which in the long term makes sense, especially as they print more and more effects like this to narrow it down to the decks that can't play Wishes or don't have access to the Wishes mechanics aren't at a disadvantage. But again, part of the appeal of Commander is the restrictions in place, the colour identity restrictions, the number of card restrictions, and those restrictions should breed creativity in theory. So some people would like to, and I can see why they would, keep the game to a 100 card versus a 100 card format. Problem is, we are already breaking that rule. We've already had it with Companion, where now you can have 101 cards accessible to you. 1 in the Companion zone, 1 in the Command zone, and then 99 in your deck. The Wishes are not allowed because, as Sheldon said, they didn't want them to work. Meanwhile, the Companions were allowed at Ikoria launch. Now I'm all for people getting to play with their toys, and in many ways, the idea that allowing people to play Companions does that is great, and I don't really mind too much that Companions in a vacuum are legal and available and accessible and work within the rules of Commander. But it starts to really weaken any consideration for keeping the format aesthetically or mechanically pure, an argument that other members of the CAG, the Commander Advisory Group, have made against me when I've been arguing for hybrid mana in the past. Part of me wonders if, much like with Wishes, the Rules Committee did not want Companion, but Wizards really put its foot down. It wanted Ikoria to be hype, to be talked about, and to sell. So making one of your flagship mechanics playable in the biggest casual and collectible format of the game makes sense. We aren't seeing that with Strixhaven though, and the Learn Lessons, so I continue to be confused as to what the fuck is going on over there. I wonder if Wizards were burnt on the Companion thing because it was such a mess for pretty much every format barring Commander, that they didn't push for Learn and Lesson. And another thing that I want to address, and let's be honest about this, is that Companions and Wishes are quite different in how they function in the game. The Companions are a known entity. There is 10 of them, one of which is banned for good reason, by the way. Don't fucking get me started on that in the comment section. It should be banned. Lutri is dumb. It doesn't make any sense to allow it to be unbanned. Don't start. Please don't. Stop. Stop typing. Stop it. But the 9 of them are known. They have restrictions themselves to be able to be played, and we know what they do. Wishes, on the other hand, open you up to be able to tutor for pretty much anything in Magic depending on which wishes you've got access to. And that's more of an open season for degenerate nonsense, oppressive nonsense, or just to make the wishes kind of like must plays and therefore up their price as well. And Learn and Lesson is more comparable to Companion than Wishes in that sense, as in we know what they can go and grab. But one is legal and the other isn't. It's a bit confusing, honestly. I am truly torn on Wishes and Commander. I don't mind either way. In short, I have no particular horse in this race, and perhaps I probably err on the side of caution, thinking perhaps we should keep the monster in Pandora's box, rather than having to correct the mess later down the line when we've allowed Wishes, which makes everyone start playing them. Subsequently, their price goes up. Some people complain about the price, others buy into it. Then they restrict them again down the line, or ban them, or whatever, or change the rules again. And it's a potential mess that can be avoided just by not entertaining it. So although I'm very much on the fence for this, and I know some people are going to be like, wow, I bloody hate centrists, but we're not talking about centrism around fucking fascism here, right? Punch fascists. But my point is, although I'm on the fence about this, I probably err on the side of caution when it comes to fucking Wishes. But on the other side again, to discuss both sides, Commander's kind of a mess anyway, right? Cradles, for example, are exploding in price and are inaccessible but are a Commander staple, and EDH is just a load of ridiculous yet glorious nonsense anyway, so I don't really care if my opponent casts a wish and goes and grabs a ham sandwich from outside the game. However, what does concern me with all this is that Wizards of the Coast evidently are pushing towards exploring the space more and more. And if we keep seeing more and more cards appear in the exile zone, the outside board game zone, or whatever the fuck it is, and then some of them are legal like Companion and others aren't, that's kind of confusing. Especially if their legality or their ability to be played or their function with the rules is kind of like an arbitrary choice. It's kind of weird. It's kind of dumb. I guess in a way, as more and more of these outside the game things are added to Magic, I kind of hope Companion was a blip. And we see the RC and Commander in general hold steadfast to this idea that the game's about having a 100-card deck against 3 other 100-card decks. I guess ultimately I don't want to see new players confuzzled when they can play their Companions and they can play their Ultramorphs, but they can't play their Wishes their lessons, and their blind eruptions from their special deck they've summoned by sacrificing 3 XYZ contraption summons to the Elder Gods of Eldritch Horror. I just think that would be confusing. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. I err on the side of caution. I'm not a big fan of the idea of unleashing something for the sake of it, and I don't even think I'd bother playing Wishes much myself in Commander anyway. Because that's the thing, right? You don't have a horse in the race if you can't be bothered to go and buy the Wishes and make a sideboard. And carrying 115 cards in a deck box sounds tight, especially when you double or triple sleeve. I'm not into that. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think I'm being too much of a fence sitter on an issue that I think is perfectly reasonable to sit on the fence about? Do you feel strongly about Wishes? Do you think they should be illegal in Commander? Or alternatively, are you like me, where you probably err on the side of caution, honestly? Or do you think it's a terrible idea and Wishes will break the fundamental game balance of Commander? Not that there is really any balance. Let me know in the comment section below. I've been Vince, like I said. Hit that like button, smash that bell. And don't forget, if you want to try out Skillshare, there is a link in the description below. First 1,000 people to click that link, get a free premium trial. Ta-ta for now.